Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everybody. Welcome to this fourth Avant-Scène Conseil webinar. As you can notice, this webinar is going to be in English exceptionally. So if you are not a native or used to listening in English, well, it's a good opportunity to learn at the same time you're learning other skills. And if you are used to English speakers, then that's great. It's going to be easy for you to follow. In any case, I'm Peter Barrett, and I'll be hosting this webinar today alongside our guest, Ann Lee. So let me tell you a little bit more about Avant-Scène Conseil, what we do, and then I'll tell you more about Anne and what she's going to tell you about today. How she's going to help you really raise the level of your technical, complex presentations. So at Avant-Scène Conseil, we are a 30-year international boutique training firm specialized in communication skills and leadership skills. For the past 30 years, we've accompanied many big international clients and smaller ones to help raise the level of their incredible talents and directors inside their companies when it comes to communication skills, presentation skills, and of course, leadership skills. We go anywhere in the world to help these great high achievers become even better leaders and communicators. And Han has been doing that for a long time. She's a great trainer, of course. She's also associate director at Avant-Scène Conseil alongside our team. And Anne has been in this business for, God knows, like 25 years on that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And train all over the world, great leaders, especially in scientific fields. That's actually one of the main clients. Some of the main clients we have at Avant-Scène historically are scientific clients, people from R&D, research and development departments, and we help them simplify, make their presentations more engaging, make it more interesting, so that people will listen to the scientists, because we desperately need more scientists to be listened to, as we know. So, and that's your expertise, and that's what you're going to tell us about today. How can we, as a data-oriented, scientifically oriented, more technical expert, how do we make ourselves heard?
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Well, I'm going to start off by asking you a question, Peter. I don't know if the name Alan Alda means anything to you.
Well, actually, no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more?
This is the generation gap here. Alan Alda is a famous American actor, very well known for his work in MASH, a cult TV series. But he's also known for working with scientists. He hosted a program by the PBS radio show called American Scientific Frontiers. And what he would do, he would interview a scientist about his work. And obviously he had to prepare for these interviews with the scientist. And he realized that it was a huge challenge. He hosted this program for 13 years, and he wrote a book about his experience with this great title, If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? So thanks, Peter. So I think that really sort of sums up the situation of many of the scientists that I have worked with. You know, they are experts in what they do. They're passionate about what they do, and they're extremely comfortable when they're talking to other scientists or people in similar environments. But when it comes to talking to a non-expert audience, often key stakeholders, this is where sometimes and often the trouble starts. Now, I know that, Peter, you know, you've got a lot of experience in communicating, and I wonder, what do you think are some of the challenges that these scientists come up against when it's a non-expert audience?
Yeah, in my experience, the biggest problem is using words that no one understands. It's these acronyms, these very context-dependent acronyms. It's one thing that I always find very funny is when I go and train a new group of scientists in a different company or different sector, and they use the same acronym to mean something completely different than another scientist in another sector. And it's obvious to them. And I'm like, well, other people might be using the exact same thing for a completely different meaning. So I think that's one typical challenge I see, is just lacking any sense of the fact that others might have a different reference point than they do.
Yeah, I think it's a very key point.
I think we've just lost Anne, so hopefully she will reconnect. I'm gonna try to get her back on. See, technology, as soon as you have a go at the science, technology will grab your speaking time away from us. Oh, and you're back.
What did I say?
And you were saying, you were being tough on the scientist side.
Yeah.
You were telling us that indeed they
Yeah.
might struggle to empathize with the audience.
Yeah. Yes. The fact that they want to be experts and they want people to recognize their expertise. But the problem is that when they're talking to non-expert audiences who are often key stakeholders, these key stakeholders might be the people that are giving the funding. They might be the people that are allocating headcount. They might be the people that want to sort of join the laboratory or the company. Or they might be the greater institutions that give recognition. But if this audience can't get what the scientist is saying, then everything is going to fall flat. So what I want to do is to sort of say, how do we help these scientists? And I just want to tell you a small story that a few years ago, I was working with a group of research and development scientists on a program developed by Avant-Scène that was called Communicate with Impact. And one of the first exercises we do with them is ask them to share a personal story, something close to their hearts. It could be a hobby, a book, or a trip that they've been on. And I remember one, we'll call him John, and he was a wine enthusiast. And he, in fact, told a story where he took the whole group, there were about 10 of us there. It was almost as if he took us, to the vineyard. We could see the grapes. He told us about the production steps, the problems that can come with insect damage or, mildew, that sort of thing. And by the end of it, we felt that we were almost tasting the wine. It was absolutely fantastic. It was great. The second exercise that we asked them to do is to share a professional topic, something key, but to a non-expert audience. And here, John, it was as if he was a different person. It was as if the lights had gone out. It was dry, it was facts, it was bullet points. And I said, well, John, what happened? When you told us your personal story, what did you want to do? And he said, well, I wanted you to be as engaged as I was. I wanted you to be interested in wine. I wanted you to perhaps even sort of, perhaps join a wine tasting club. I said, yeah, well, it worked. I said, but to get us to feel like that, what did you have to do? And he said, well, I guess it's not an easy subject, wine tasting and wine growing. It's a bit technical. So I had to make it accessible for you. I had to sort of really, make you feel, the excitement of taking that wine to the maturing stage. So I had to put it in terms that you would understand. I said, exactly. And in your professional job, I'm sure that you're as passionate about that as you are about wine. And you want to get your audience as interested in it. So why don't you take the same approach? Use storytelling. And he said, what? I said, yes. You told a story. You took us on a journey. You made it accessible. You connected to us. We could understand it. You put the terms in simple words. You used story. And he sort of said, oh, I never thought you could talk about science like that. So he reworked his professional message. And it was like an aha moment for him. And it was absolutely, it was sort of a no turning back after that. So story is really powerful. we talk a lot about storytelling, Peter, and often people say, oh, it's a gadget. Everyone talks about storytelling, but it's not. Story is a powerful tool, and I'm sure that, you as a sort of expert in communications, some of the things that make story as a powerful tool. And I don't know if you want to share what a few of the things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe before I share like what I like, what I enjoy in stories, I just want to share something I don't enjoy in stories, because I think a lot of scientists might be repulsed by the idea of storytelling for a good reason. It's because they've seen bad storytelling. Because when you see someone faking a story, it's obvious, right? You've seen all these TED Talks where people reproduce the same methodology in a very robotic way. And 10% of them are amazing because they are genuine, they're personal, they get deep into something that is as personal as it is universal, as connecting as it is simple. And many others are just really copy pasted chat GPT stories, And I think when you see that, and that's such an adverse reaction as an audience member, at least that's what I hear a lot from people that I see in trainings, that they fear that they won't be capable of a good story. I don't know if I can, if I'm allowed, if I can take that risk. And you're right, as soon as they get to do it, so you're like, I have a story like this as well, of a doctor telling me how it's impossible to persuade someone to take a flu shot, even though flu kills about 8,000 people a year in Europe. And it's impossible, right? Because if you disagree, if you don't want to, it's ideological. You're just not going to do it. And I asked him, do you have a story of someone who should have had a flu shot? Do you have a story? He said, yeah, I was an emergency doctor. So he told us a story of this pregnant woman, and a pregnancy is a good reason to get a flu shot. By the way, you're in danger because you can't get a lot of the treatment you would if you were not pregnant. So it's a good reason to get a flu shot. By the way, and that person got the flu, got complications. She ended up in the emergency room, but because her lungs were so damaged, she should have been pushed on her belly, and they should use a machine to help her pump air to survive. But because she's pregnant, they can't do that. So they had to choose. Right? Do we do it and risk the life of the baby? Do we not do it? They ended up doing it because in ethics and for doctors, you try to help the life that exists, that's there. Unfortunately, very fortunately, the baby survived, and the mom too. And it tells the story of like seeing the child running towards him, and the mom just embracing him, saying, "You saved my life." And it's like, it's a very positive story, but it's so powerful, it's so amazing that it really touches you. And I know it touched me. It sensitized me into thinking, "Wow, okay, I need to get a flu shot, or at least I need to help people who would be in that kind of danger to get a flu shot." It really inspired me, and I know many people around the table, just because it's a genuine story. You lived it, you experienced it, you knew it, you felt it. And I think that's the sort of universal, specific, simple, human aspect of stories that, to finally answer your question, that make it so powerful. That would be my thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the essence of stories. Stories engage, stories connect, stories are memorable, and they have, as you say, this universal appeal. We've been using stories since time immemorial. This is how, before people could read or write, this is how people learned things. They told them through stories. This is how they gave information. They would have stories around the campfire. Stories work from experience. They make the audiences work as well. When you tell stories, the imagination works. The more we make our audiences think and work, the less passive they are, the more engaged they are in what you're saying. But in fact, for scientists and stories, we're not really asking them to tell stories. We're thinking more, how do we make that complex project into something which is accessible for a non-expert audience? So it's really looking at what are the elements of stories? What are the elements? And if we look at a sort of a classic storytelling element, if Peter, you could show the slide here. As it comes up. Okay, so this is a story structure. These are the elements that we would have in a story. And when I show this to my scientists, they sort of hide under the table. They say, no, well, you're telling that I've got to talk, give a fairy tale story to my audiences. I say, no. But if we think about stories, what have we got always? We've got a setting, a kingdom. We've got a danger or an incident or a challenge that arrives that we have to solve. Then we need a solution. We've got a hero that is there. And very often, the hero, in fact, will bring the solution and put their solutions into action. So there are actions that follow the solution. And these will provide results. And results will provide next steps or a vision for the future or whatever. So in fact, the story, it's a very simple elements. We have a context, we have a problem or a need or a challenge, we have a solution, we have the actions, we have the results, and we have success. This is all a bit theoretical at the moment, but don't worry, we're going to see a real life example in a few minutes. But how do we then add the narrative to this? These are our actors, these are our elements, but now we need phases or chapters. So if we can now look, what would be the phases that we could use? Well, here we have the story phases, and this is where we bring the story to life. As in every story, we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And at the beginning, we have the context, where we introduce the characters, we introduce the situation. We then have a sort of rising action as we meet the challenge, the problem, the need, which will take us to a climax, a peak. And then we'll have the results that come from that peak of a falling action. And that will lead us to the resolution and the next steps. And in the very way that we see these story phases, it makes us tell the story in a different way. It's not like having a set of bullet points that we go boom, boom, boom. This actually helps us change the way we use our voice. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you feel, if you have any comment on that, Peter, but it's really the idea of dividing our story with our elements and putting them into chapters. Okay, this is the way a story flows.
Right, and I'm putting myself kind of in the shoes of the scientist and the expert here. It could be hard to imagine that there is a story to tell at all. It just feels like, I've got facts. I've got to give out these facts so that people will make an informed decision, and that's my prerogative. That's the only thing that I should do, right? And so for you, like, what's the added the contributing value of story in that case? Like, why can't I just list the facts? Is it just because it's boring, or is it for a different reason? I mean, what do you think?
I think as the fact of story brings the human element. We know that when we're trying to put over our ideas, we put them over, of course, and especially scientists, with very rational arguments. But rational arguments are not, they don't persuade or they don't convince alone. We need the emotion. We need something that makes us feel. This is the convincing part. This is where it's not just the fact that we are giving dry facts. It's, this scientist, why is he credible? We share our passion. And what we find very often with our audiences is that audience tend to mirror what they feel from a speaker. If they feel a speaker is passionate, if they feel a speaker is engaged, then the audience tend to be more engaged and more passionate too. If the speaker is dry and within his own world, then the audience will disappear. They won't be engaged. And of course, the scientist wants his audience to be as engaged as he is. He wants his audience to get it as he gets it. So I think this is the power of story, that it adds that human element. We have the feeling side. This part that is part of all of us humans. It's the touchy feeling that is so important as well.
Right.
Okay, so I think this is for me is the key thing why story can help translating into. We could talk about the pandemic, the COVID, when we had the COVID pandemic, and that was a context, that was the situation. What was the danger? Well, the danger was because we didn't have vaccines. You know, the traditional vaccine took a long time to produce, and by the time we produced it, there'd be a huge, half of the population would be dead because it wouldn't have worked. And then we had mRNA from Pfizer, Moderna. This new technology. This was the hero. This was the solution. And they were able to show through their tests that it was efficient, that it worked. And the results of that was, of course, declining hospitalizations. That they managed, in fact, to take back control of the pandemic and then lead on to the next step, which has changed the whole phase of vaccines in our scientific environment. So this is a way that story can explain something which was very, very difficult for the population to understand, having been through many years of saying, well, it takes 7 years to produce a vaccine.
Right.
I think probably it'd be a good idea now to show a real life example. What I want to show you is what I feel is a very good example of a scientist talking about a very complex subject, which is late stage glaucoma. And what I've done is I've edited this video to show you the different phases and the different elements of stories so that you can actually follow through as he tells about his work, his research, and the challenges that he was up against. So I'll leave you to watch the film.
Join me for a moment and do this. What can you see? It's like a tunnel view of the world, right? Now what I want you to do is make that tunnel smaller and smaller. What you see now is the kind of vision that a patient with end-stage glaucoma has. 300,000 Australians have glaucoma, but half of them are undiagnosed, and a major issue is our ability to detect the disease before it's too late. We can measure pressure in the eye, which is a risk factor, but only in about 50% of cases. And we can detect glaucoma clinically by looking at the back of the eye and by testing peripheral vision. But these signs can take up to 10 years to develop, and by that stage, the damage is done. They call it the silent thief of sight for good reason. Now, vision is lost in glaucoma because these things, retinal ganglion cells, die off. They're the nerve cells that make up the optic nerve, and without them, we can't transmit visual information from the eye to the brain. The traditional view of glaucoma is that it's a one-way street, ultimately ending in ganglion cell death. But there's emerging evidence from our lab that if we treat glaucoma patients early, we can improve visual function. And this suggests that ganglion cells at an early stage of dysfunction are in fact recoverable and do not need to die. We call them comatose ganglion cells, and they can be woken up. So the question is, how can we detect these comatose ganglion cells before it's too late? Well, that's where my PhD comes in. I measured electrical activity from individual cells using a microscopic glass electrode. That's called patch clamping. This is one of the cells I recorded from and filled with a dye at the same time. I studied over 100 mouse eyes to work out if comatose ganglion cells had an electrical signature that we could detect. And what I discovered was that they have difficulties in generating action potentials, or the signal that carries visual information from our eye along the optic nerve into the brain. Now, this blew my mind, because for the first time, we had a way to detect comatose ganglion cells. I was then able to show that these cells can wake up from their coma, regain the ability to fire a signal. In other words, they could undergo a prolonged period of loss of function, but still recover at a later stage. And this likely explained at the single cell level the changes we observed in glaucoma patients following treatment. Now that we have an electrical signature for comatose ganglion cells, we're one step closer to using similar electrophysiological measures in humans to detect glaucoma earlier at a point where ganglion cells are recoverable. It's my hope that one day we won't have to tell any patient that it's too late to save their vision. So let's catch this silent thief before it's stolen any sight. Thank you.
Okay, what do you think, Peter? I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'd cut up my microphone to let the man speak. No, it's really impressive because you see a lot of layers in there. Every time he's saying something complex, it brings him back to a very simple, practical explanation, something like we can physically touch and understand easily. He uses like very short metaphors that just give us a clear idea of what's going on. The one-way street. We think of glaucoma as a one-way street. So that's clear. Okay, well, that's it. We're going to die. And he says they don't have to die. Now, okay, that's like very simple. I don't have to die. Very simple sentence, but it tells everything. It says, okay, we can save them. And then what's the action, the weapon? The hero is these comatose ganglion cells, detecting them. So how do we detect them? So it's very didactic. At the same time, a lot of metaphors. At the same time, it's a good story. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty bang on 3-minute presentation of a PhD. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, as you say, he's got all of the elements there, and it was really nice to sort of just to be able to sort of identify them, because it's not just talking about a story or an experience. He's talking about his work. There, he could have been talking to a group of people who were going to be funding his research, and it was totally understandable and accessible. He connected to his audience. They could relate to it. He used, as Peter says, metaphors. He could have called it late-stage glaucoma. So what? What did it mean? He decided to call it catching the silent thief of sight. And that's really core to his whole presentation there, his whole talk. And if people remember that, catching the silent thief of sight, that's what will stay in their mind. And when they think of that, they will remember what he said. And if you noticed, he began with catching the silent thief of sight, and he ended with catching the silent thief of sight. It's what we call bookends. So people, in fact, audiences tend to remember what they hear first and what they hear last. And when it's well done, they join the dots. And so that's a very, very powerful technique that he used. And it was also, one of my colleagues the other day sent me something about 6-word stories that we know. And there it was 6 words, and 6-word stories can be very powerful. They can also be used if you use slides. If you think, what is the key message in my slide, and you try to translate it into a 6-word story, then that will really help the flow of what you're saying, because your slides are your story illustration, basically. So they anchor your messages. He also, I don't know if you noticed the passion in his voice, the way he actually narrated it. It was exciting. And it's not because that he's a scientist that he has to sort of speak in a very monotone and keep it flat. It's his work. It's his job to be able to communicate it. And as we said, very simple, very pedagogical. The use of the metaphors, I think, is also a very important technique, and it's something that we're not always very familiar with or whatever. So I believe that we need to build our metaphor muscle. I know often we do an exercise on if I say to you, Peter, Peter, you've got a smartphone, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
How could you describe your smartphone rather than saying it's a smartphone? Can you find a metaphor, that could do this?
It's my second brain.
It's your second, exactly. It's your second brain. So immediately you use that, and of course we will start thinking, oh, second brain. We will perhaps visualize it. We will feel it. We will relate to it, and that's the whole
connected to.
it's your
It's
light.
got eyes.
Yeah.
It's got eyes. It's got a processor.
Exactly. So I think we need to be, if we are people who give talks and we give complex talks, then metaphors are absolutely essential to us. There's a fantastic reference, a lady called Ann Miller, who wrote a book called The Lady with the Iceberg, which is an extremely strange title, but she's made her living and her career about helping people use metaphors and analogies. And she says that metaphors are a shortcut to instant understanding. And it's absolutely true. The more complex something is, the more we need a metaphor. The more resistance we might have in our audiences, the more we need a metaphor. So it's really worth building your metaphor muscle to help get your complex stories across to the audiences. What else did he use? What else did our friend Eamon Fye use? He talked about patch clamping. So a technical term, and then he explained what it was. He used his retinal ganglion cells as if they were actors in his story. He said they are comatose, but they can be woken up, as if they were humans. So he gave this human aspect to the story. For me, it's really one of the best examples that we can have.
Right.
The other day, a scientist said to me, okay, Anne, these stories are great, but they're in 2 minutes. Can you cure AIDS with a 2-minute story? I said, of course you can't. But what you can do in 2 minutes or in 3 minutes is that you can raise awareness. You can create or provoke curiosity. You can engage people. You can get people to come running after you to want to know more. And that's the key thing. We live in a time where we have little time to get our messages across. So we have to be concise, clear, engaging. And it's the hardest thing is to make it short. But once you master these elements and the phases of making a complex story simple, just by following this little theory that we've just seen demonstrated, you will find that if you need to make it longer, you'll make your chapters longer. And each chapter can be a story. So to answer my scientist who sort of said, can you cure AIDS through a 2-minute story? It doesn't have to be just a 2-minute story. It can be longer as long as you follow the flow and you follow those different elements. And he was satisfied with that answer, so I was pleased about that. I don't know at this point, Peter.
I think you're right. I mean, and it reminds me of maybe different analogies, and that is that, often people in trainings, when we talk about storytelling, they tell me, Peter, I'm worried that people have seen it so often, they've heard it so often that they're not going to be impacted, that somehow this doesn't work anymore. And every time I ask them, have people stopped buying fantasy books? Have people stopped watching TV shows and movies? Have people kind of stopped being interested in stories after, I don't know, 10,000 years of written stories, probably 200,000 years of oral stories? No, they haven't gotten bored. And there's a good reason. It's that this is something profoundly connected to our humanity that is in a story structure And that's what you're tapping into by utilizing this method. And what I hear from a lot of scientists is resistance, as if the word because the word should be different from their perspective. It's kind of, the word should be logical. People should decide based on logical argumentation. Sure, maybe they should. Maybe. Not even sure that's true, but maybe they should. But they don't. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to stay in your corner and hope that people will finally understand you? Or will you actually act to be understood? And that's bring back the power in you to make a difference. And you know what? It's fun. That's also a thing, right? It's fun to come up with stories and metaphors and to write in an engaging way. It gets you excited as much as it gets the audience excited, and I think that's like the super positive, double positive effect, let's say, of storytelling.
I think probably on the other side, for a scientist, when they give a talk and they don't manage to capture that interest, when they see that look on that face, Alan Alda, I think there is a huge frustration,
Yeah,
or demotivation. And as I said, it's these non-expert audiences are often the key stakeholders, and it's unfortunately part of their job if they want to be heard. And it's a pity if they're not heard. If they want to be heard, then they have to package their messages in a way that connects or that relates to their audiences. So it's not an easy job. It might be a simple, it's a simple structure. The theory is simple, but of course, putting it into practice is not easy. So the other thing here is, of course, once they have their storyline and once they have the faith, the next thing is practice it. Find a friend, test your core messages, your 6-word stories, if you like. Try out, know your beginnings and know your endings. There's the thing about, I believe, the storytelling and speaking in public in general is that it's not rocket science. You don't have to go away and read a load of books. You can if you like. There are thousands of them out there. But it's technique. It's just applying certain techniques one by one, building on your own potential, and ticking those boxes when they work, because they will work. And it's just that. But it's mastering little by little.
It's an interesting. It makes me think of a classic line in comedy writing. So in comedy, there's like, there are two schools. There's a school of thought that says, you can't learn comedy. And there's a school of thought that indeed you can learn comedy. I think they're both right to an extent, because it reminds me of a line like from Jerry Seinfeld, saying that, I can't teach you comedy. Like, you come to me, you ask me for advice, you go to a book, you read a book. They can't teach you comedy, but you can do comedy. And you know what? The audience will teach you, because the audience will laugh or it won't. and you'll learn what works and what doesn't. And what I love about stand-up comedians is that they intrinsically within them, they have this iteration process of fine-tuning to the perfect joke, to the perfect story. And that's also something that we can do as an expert. We are expert in one field usually when you're an expert. You'll carry that on with you for 20 years in your career, or 30 years in your career. So you got time to fine-tune and listen to your audience, see the feedback, see how they react, what they react to, change, twist, modify, and it will get better every time. But if instead of doing that, you keep just piling on information as you learn and you become more expert, as opposed to fine-tuning to your audience needs, then you're just going to put the energy you have to create this presentation in a wrong direction. You're going to over-complexify instead of trying to have an impact. And that's the trend I tend to see, is We choose complexification when we get more expertise. We make that choice unconsciously when we could choose to fine tune to the audience. You're like, okay, I've seen that, I heard that, need to modify it this way. Okay, I tried this, they didn't react well, they didn't understand. I'll change it, see next time if it works better. And the audience will teach you. And I think that's an interesting also way of thinking about it and kind of not feeling so much pressure from it. Well, try it out, experience it.
And of course, the key thing that you're saying there, Peter, is the audience is key.
Right.
You know, that it has to be. You know, if your audience says "so what," then you've failed. Basically, you have to be a profiler. It's you know the key things that we have to think about when you're going in there. Who are you going to talk to? Be a profiler. Find out about them. What is their knowledge about what you're going to say? Decide how much you need to simplify, and especially decide what you don't say. Okay, it's this is again one of the big failings that we often want to put everything into
Right.
what we're saying, and we have to really say, well, I don't need to say this now. Get them running after me. They want to know more. Okay, so it's really sort of to tick those boxes.
Right.
So basically, for me, Peter, well, that's it. It's sort of been a sort of a little journey here and there about, you know, I hope that you know, there are some takeaways from this short.
I think that
short
that was great, and especially, you know, seeing a concrete example of how it could be done, and how you don't have to feel frustrated about the information you convey, which can be also a problem when you're an expert, because you see the impact on the audience. And there's maybe one thing that I like to say also about this is the difference between your sense of perfectionism and impact. Being perfect is a sort of intrinsic perspective on what should be, right? But the impact on your audience is something completely different from that. You can make the perfect speech according to you and have no impact. And you can fuck up according to you and have a great impact. And I find that very humbling when I'm, you know, if I'm presenting, is I'm not going to focus on me too much, on what I want to say, on all the details. I'm going to focus on the result. What is the audience doing about what I'm talking about? You know, are they giving me money for my project? Good. I don't need to overburden myself with a sense of perfectionism. It's done. The objective is reached. And I think that's also from a personal growth perspective very helpful. It makes you feel better. Like, if I put my intention on that objective, I don't have to feel so much of this completely this hubris pressure on my shoulders that is disconnected from reality. I can just reconnect it to a real thing. Okay, do I reach that? Yeah, good. No matter what I said, it worked. So that's what matters. And I kind of like that as well. And you mentioned maybe one last thing. You mentioned, you know, well, you need to work, you need to iterate, you need to practice, find a friend, and maybe a shameless moment of self praise and publicity here, but find a coach, find a trainer as well. You know, it's very hard to do this by yourself, to practice, to get better at it. And in training, that's why we are not worried at all about giving out all our techniques in these free webinars. It's because we know that the added value of a trainer is being there with you, is giving you feedback, is providing you with this process of iteration that is so difficult to come up for yourself. Much like a workout coach is there with you to help you through the difficult moments, because there will be. And if you just look at all these, you know, building up muscle videos online, it's probably not gonna create any muscle on you, right? It's not gonna make a big difference. So work out and work at it. And if you need help to do so, if you think your employees need help to do so, don't hesitate to contact us, of course, at Avant-Scène Conseil, where we can do this in French and English, of course, in Italian and Spanish, all around the world. And Anne and all of our team would be very happy to help all of your leaders and talents get better at presenting and communicating science. Maybe before we leave you all to your afternoon, I just want to share a quick QR code that you can scan to give us some feedback. So you can check out this QR code, and there will be a survey up that you can check out and give us some feedback if you have some. With this, thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon. I'll see you on the 29th of January with another webinar in French, this time about PowerPoint presentations, how to make them interesting and aesthetic.